I glanced around as we approached the club. The city beneath us felt so distant, as if I was standing on top of the world. This was supposed to be our evening. Thomas had promised romance, promised that we could escape all the noise and chaos that had taken over our lives in the past few months. We rarely spent time together anymore, and I hoped this dinner would be an opportunity to rekindle what seemed to be slipping away. But everything changed the moment he said, "Julian will be joining us." I froze, feeling a slight chill run down my spine. Julian, his old friend, whom he hadn't seen in years. Thomas had spoken about him with admiration, but I never expected to see him in person. Images flashed through my mind from Thomas's stories. Successful, charismatic, a man people were drawn to. But for some reason, I felt uneasy. Perhaps because I had wanted this evening for just the two of us? We took our seats on the rooftop, and I enjoyed the warm breeze playing with my hair. Thomas was absorbed in his phone as usual. Work, business, it took too much of his time. I sighed and looked away when suddenly I noticed Julian entering the club. He was exactly as I had imagined, tall with a slight stubble, perfectly dressed in a tailored suit. There was something magnetic in his gaze. Julian passed by several tables, barely acknowledging anyone until his eyes landed on me. I felt my heart skip a beat. "Amelia, right?" he said as he sat down across from me. "Thomas has told me a lot about you." I nodded, trying to hide my sudden excitement. Thomas, seemingly uninterested in our conversation, continued working on his phone. I, however, felt Julian studying me closely, as if trying to understand something about me that even I wasn't aware of. A strange tension began to build inside me. Everything felt wrong. This evening was supposed to be for Thomas and me, and now I was sitting face to face with a man who seemed to know more about me than he should. I barely noticed when they served dessert. The whole evening I had been on edge. Julian, his intense gaze, the unspoken questions that seemed to linger in his mind. Thomas, as usual, was absorbed in his own world, and I felt alone at the table, despite his presence. When the plate with the eclair was set before me, I realized how hungry I truly was. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it. Perhaps I was rushing too much. The sweet cream tasted divine, but before I could enjoy it, something went wrong. The eclair got stuck in my throat and I couldn't breathe. Panic quickly set in and I tried to get Thomas's attention. But as always, he was completely engrossed in his phone. My vision began to blur and I couldn't even make a sound. But then I felt strong hands around my waist. Julian. He quickly but carefully embraced me from behind and performed the maneuver that saved me from choking. I felt air rush into my lungs and I exhaled with relief when I could finally breathe again. When I turned to thank him, our eyes met. There was something in his gaze that made me freeze for a moment, something more than just concern for my well-being. The second seemed to stretch into an eternity before I could look away. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his hand still resting on my shoulder. "Yes, thank you," I whispered, feeling a slight flush on my cheeks. That moment, it seemed to create an invisible connection between us. Thomas, finally tearing his eyes away from his phone, noticed the situation, but all he saw was a resolved issue. It seemed insignificant to him, something that had passed without consequence. "Are you okay?" he asked casually, not even bothering to get up. "Yes, I'm fine," I replied, feeling a pang of disappointment at his indifference. Julian, seizing the moment, turned to Thomas. "Thomas, would you mind if I asked Amelia for a dance?" I almost choked again, but this time from surprise. A dance? After everything that just happened? Thomas shrugged, still fixated on his screen. "Sure, I don't mind. I'm not much of a dancer anyway." I hesitated, but when Julian extended his hand, I couldn't ignore it. His touch was warm and confident, and I allowed him to lead me onto the dance floor. We danced in silence to the soft music, but the atmosphere between us was far from calm. Every movement carried an invisible spark. His hand on my waist, my gaze that kept slipping over his face. This tension grew with every step, with every turn. This wasn't just a dance. It was something more, something that scared me and drew me in at the same time. A few days had passed, but every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the dance with Julian. His touch, his gaze, the sense that there was something more between us than just an acquaintance through Thomas. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they returned like a shadow that never leaves. Guilt, shame, anxiety, all blended into an unbearable mess of emotions, and each time I thought of his face, my heart betrayed me by beating faster. Thomas, as if nothing had happened, continued with his life, deeply immersed in work. He hadn't noticed the tension that had settled between Julian and me, or perhaps he simply didn't want to notice. We barely discussed that evening. Everything seemed normal, and I tried to convince myself that it should be. Then Thomas suggested meeting Julian again. "Julian invited us for dinner with friends at the golf club outside the city," he said over breakfast. "It'll be a relaxing evening, no formal dress code, just good company and a bit of golf." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know how to react. Every part of me screamed that I should decline. But what could I say? "I don't want to go because I can't stop thinking about your friend." Too risky. I nodded, hiding the inner storm behind a calm exterior. The golf club was far out of the city and I barely spoke during the drive. Thomas was lost in conversations about his work as usual. I listened, but my mind wandered elsewhere. When we arrived, Julian greeted us. He looked just as impeccable as he had that night, and the moment our eyes met, I felt that same electric charge. I tried to maintain distance, but it was impossible. In this relaxed setting, everything felt even more intimate. During dinner, Julian sat next to me. Thomas, absorbed in conversations with the other guests, paid little attention to us as usual. Julian and I exchanged brief phrases, but there was far more behind the words. In every glance, every subtle touch, something lingered. And as the evening drew to a close, he suddenly leaned in closer, speaking to me in a low, almost whispering voice. "Do you often think about that night?" His question made me freeze. I couldn't answer right away. He knew. He felt it too. Our silent admission was louder than words. My mind resisted, but my heart already knew the answer. "Too often," I whispered, not daring to look at him. This flirtation was no longer just a game. It was something more, something that had moved beyond friendship, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. When we said our goodbyes and headed home, I tried to make sense of what was happening inside me. Was it a moment of weakness, or something more? Why couldn't I stop thinking about him? I glanced at Thomas, fast asleep beside me, and sighed quietly, lost in my thoughts. Was I playing a dangerous game? Or was I simply craving something new? I could hardly believe it when Julian invited me to see his new apartment. A luxurious penthouse atop a skyscraper with a view over all of New York City. This apartment, like Julian himself, embodied success and luxury. My heart began to race again as I accepted his invitation, but something inside me tugged at my conscience. I hadn't told Thomas about it. Why? I didn't know the answer myself. On the surface, the invitation didn't seem suspicious, but something deep within me held me back from being honest. We met at the entrance of the skyscraper. As I ascended in the elevator to the penthouse, each floor felt like a step into the unknown, yet there was something magnetic about it. Julian greeted me at the door with a smile and led me inside. His apartment was even more opulent than I had imagined. Dark wooden floors, panoramic windows overlooking the glittering city, modern furniture, and art on the walls. Everything exuded refined taste and prosperity. "Welcome to my humble abode," Julian smirked, gesturing toward the massive windows. "Humble?" I smiled, glancing around. "It's breathtaking." We made our way to the rooftop, where a table was set under the open sky. A light evening breeze played with my hair, and for a moment I forgot all my doubts. This dinner felt special, far removed from reality. Julian was polite and attentive, but with each word, with each glance, I felt the invisible tension between us growing. We talked about everything: life, work, dreams. He shared personal stories, and I unexpectedly found myself opening up in return. There was something about his presence that made me feel at ease, as if I could be myself without fear of judgment. But along with that ease came the realization that our connection had crossed the line of mere friendship. As the evening began to draw to a close, I sensed something was about to happen. Julian suddenly, softly touched my hand. His fingers were warm, and though the gesture was simple, it stirred a storm of emotions within me. I looked at him, and in that moment, everything became clear. I could no longer ignore my attraction to him. "This was wonderful," I finally said, trying to keep my composure. "Yes," he replied softly, his gaze never leaving mine. That dinner and his touch left me with the feeling that there was no turning back. I still didn't understand why I had kept this evening from Thomas, but now I knew one thing. My life was starting to change, and I could no longer control it. Thomas had always loved organizing grand events, and this party was no exception. The luxurious ballroom of the historic hotel was filled with his colleagues, friends, and business partners. I felt like I was in a fairy tale, surrounded by luxury and the sounds of music. But every time I glanced through the crowd, I searched for only one person, Julian, and he was there. His presence was so palpable I couldn't shake the tension. Every time our eyes met, I felt a tightening inside. He couldn't take his eyes off me, and despite the brilliance of everything around me, it was his attention that made me feel alive. Music played, laughter and conversation filled the hall, but my focus was solely on him. At some point, without fully realizing how it happened, Julian and I ended up alone on the balcony. The cool night air burned against my skin, and I felt a growing sense of anxious anticipation inside me. "I didn't think you'd come." His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Why wouldn't I?" I tried to smile, though my heart was pounding so hard it felt like he could hear it. Julian stepped closer, and the tension that had existed between us from the start reached its peak. "Because you know what happens when we're alone," he said, his eyes sparkling with a dangerous gleam. I knew, and it was exactly what I wanted. Every word he spoke, every step he took, pushed me closer to the edge where there was no turning back. When he leaned in to kiss me, I didn't pull away. Instead, I allowed it to happen as if it were inevitable. His lips touched mine softly, and in that moment everything around us ceased to exist. The kiss wasn't just a fleeting impulse. It was a confession, silent but deep. His hand slipped under my dress and I gasped in surprise. But instead of pushing him away, I only smiled, feeling every nerve in my body ignite. My lips whispered words I hadn't expected. "Keep going." Julian didn't hesitate. His touch became more confident and I felt my legs begin to buckle. A wave of pleasure coursed through me and I could barely stand. It was such an overwhelming sensation that I lost control of myself for a moment. When I returned to the ballroom, my heart was still racing. I could still feel his touch on my skin, and the thought of what had just happened on the balcony wouldn't leave my mind. This was more than just physical attraction. I felt myself being pulled deeper into this game between us, and what scared me the most was that I liked it. Especially the moment when his hand slipped under my short dress, and my legs began to buckle from the pleasure. I knew I had to stop. After that night on the balcony, I desperately tried to distance myself from Julian to regain control, but no matter where I went, thoughts of him kept coming back. His touch, his words, his gaze, all of it kept resurfacing in my mind. I avoided places where I might accidentally run into him, but Julian found a way. One morning, as I walked through the park, I saw him. He approached with the same confidence as always, and my heart began to race again. It was inevitable, and instead of running away, I stayed. "I shouldn't have come," I said as he got closer. "But you did," he replied quietly, his voice calm but his eyes showed an inner struggle. "You know we need to talk." We walked along the park path, leaving silence in our wake. Words seemed unnecessary, but so much was left unsaid between us. Finally, Julian broke the silence. "I shouldn't say this." His voice was quiet, but there was sincerity in it. "But I can't hide it anymore. What I feel for you, it's not just physical attraction, Amelia. It's something more." I felt a tightening inside me. Those words, though I had expected them, hit me like a bolt of lightning. I stopped and looked at him, unsure of what to say. "Julian, this is wrong," I finally whispered. "You know Thomas is my husband, your best friend." He closed his eyes as if my words pained him. "I know," he whispered, "and it's killing me. I know it's wrong. I know I'm betraying him, but Amelia, I can't stop. I've tried, but everything I feel, it's only getting stronger." My heart was torn. I knew he was right. We both knew. Thomas was a good man. He trusted Julian, he trusted me, and what I was doing was betrayal. But alongside the guilt was something else, something that pulled me toward Julian even more. "What about Thomas?" I asked quietly, not sure if I wanted to hear the answer. "We can't keep doing this. We can't do this to him." Julian stepped closer, his gaze filled with pain and desire. "Do you think I don't understand that?" he said almost desperately. "Thomas is my friend. I've known him for years. I don't want to do this to him. But with you, it's different. I can't resist." I froze. His words were a confession that he was struggling too, that this was just as hard for him as it was for me. "So what do we do now?" I whispered, feeling a storm of emotions rise inside me. He was silent for a moment, then offered, "Let's meet somewhere else. Somewhere we can talk without prying eyes, without this constant guilt. I need to explain myself for us to be clear." My doubts swirled inside, but I couldn't deny that I wanted this to continue. I nodded, unable to say a word. When Julian suggested spending the day at an old amusement park, I was surprised. The place was far from the city, forgotten and abandoned as if stuck in time. I didn't know what to expect, but part of me craved this unusual adventure, something to distract me from the persistent thoughts and questions that had been haunting me lately. We arrived early in the morning. The park seemed almost empty, though in the distance faint children's laughter could be heard. We wandered between old carousels and rides, and for a moment it felt like we had returned to childhood. The lightness of the place lifted my spirits, but somewhere in the background lingered the shadow of something more, those hidden desires that grew stronger with each hour we spent together. We rode the Ferris wheel, laughed at the bumper cars, but as the sun began to set, the lightness of the day shifted to tension, palpable in every movement. Julian began to look at me differently, as if he was waiting for something. And I knew exactly what. When we reached the old haunted house at the edge of the park, it felt like this moment had been inevitable. We stood in front of the darkened sign, and I felt everything inside me tighten in anticipation. Julian took my hand and I followed him inside. Inside, it was dark and quiet. The floor creaked beneath our feet, and the walls were lined with old peeling figures of ghosts and monsters, but none of the eerie decorations could compare to the tension that hung between us. We stopped in one of the hidden corners where no light reached us, and without a word, Julian pulled me close. His lips met mine hungrily, and it was no longer the innocent pull that had been between us before. This was a surge, a passion that had been building from the very start of our encounters. I could no longer resist. His hands began to slowly remove my clothing, and I didn't stop him. We left each other nearly naked, and soon I was left only in a thin shirt. My breathing was uneven, his fingers gliding over my skin, and my hands eagerly pulled him closer. It was a moment of total surrender, where reason faded and desire took over. We gave in completely to the passion, thinking of nothing but each other. When it was over, I stood there trembling, but not from the cold. My thoughts were empty, but inside there was a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. Julian looked at me as if he was expecting something, but I couldn't say a word. That old haunted house had become the place where everything changed. We had crossed a line that could no longer be ignored, and our feelings, like the locked-up monsters in that house, were now unleashed. When Julian and I agreed to meet at the abandoned beach on the outskirts of the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were drifting further and further away from reality. With each new, more secluded place we found, I realized that this affair had become more than just a fleeting attraction. It consumed me completely, despite all the obvious risks. The beach was empty. Only the sound of waves crashing on the shore and the distant cries of seagulls accompanied us. The sun was slowly setting, giving the place a sense of detachment from the world, as if we existed only for each other in this moment. We walked along the sand, talking about everyday things, but we both knew that our conversation was merely a cover for something much bigger. The silence between the words was filled with the truth we already knew. Our feelings had gone beyond what was acceptable. There was no point in pretending it was still just passion. We were bound by something much deeper. Julian stopped and looked at me, his face serious. but that familiar spark glimmered in his eyes. He slowly reached out and ran his fingers along my cheek. "Amelia," he said quietly, and I felt a tightening inside me. "You know this is more than just a physical connection. We both feel it." I knew he was right. With every day, with every new step, we were sinking deeper. What had started as a fleeting attraction had now turned into something more, something that scared me with its intensity. I sighed and looked out toward the sea. The waves gently rolling onto the shore seemed to hypnotize me. "I can't deny it," I replied, not taking my eyes off the horizon. "But what now, Julian? We've already gone too far." He stepped closer and wrapped his arms around my waist, his touch both comforting and exhilarating. I felt his warmth, and in that moment, all my fears dissolved. With his hands on me, I forgot about the world around us. "We have to be careful," he said. And I heard a note of worry in his voice, though he didn't loosen his hold. "But I can't walk away from what we have. You mean more to me than I ever imagined." His words sank deeper than the sound of the waves, and I knew I couldn't walk away either. We stood there on the beach, far from the world, and I realized that in that moment nothing else mattered. All the risks, all the doubts, they faded into the background. We were diving headfirst into this romance, despite its potentially destructive consequences. As the sun set on the horizon, the world seemed to slow, and our feelings engulfed us, like the waves crashing against the shore. That evening was no different from any other. Thomas and I were sitting together on the couch watching a movie. It had been so long since we spent time like this, just the two of us. And for a moment, I felt that familiar warmth between us. I remembered how we used to enjoy these quiet moments, feeling genuinely close. Thomas was engrossed in the film, and I rested my head on his shoulder, suddenly recalling how I used to love these peaceful evenings. But that was before everything changed. My heart softened for just a second. It seemed like there was still something alive between us. But the moment was abruptly interrupted by the sound of my phone vibrating. The sharp buzz pulled me out of that brief memory, forcing me back into reality. I instinctively reached for the phone lying next to me on the table. The screen lit up with a short message from Julian. "I can't stop thinking about our last meeting." My breath hitched, and I froze, realizing just how dangerous this moment was. Thomas didn't seem to notice at first, but this time I wasn't so lucky. His gaze lingered on the screen a second too long. He saw the name. I felt the tension thicken in the air. But Thomas didn't make a scene, didn't ask right away about what he had seen. He simply pulled away from me slowly, continuing to watch the movie as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had happened. He had noticed. Thomas became different. In the following days, I started to realize that he was watching me more closely. It was as if he was looking for signs, small details that could confirm his suspicions. He didn't confront me, didn't ask any questions, but I could feel that he had figured it out. Every move I made, every glance, everything was under careful scrutiny. I couldn't shake the feeling that the crack between us was growing wider. Everything that had been hidden behind the veil of my meetings with Julian was now slowly surfacing. Thomas had begun to notice, and it was only a matter of time before the truth destroyed everything. When Julian suggested meeting at the old theater, I didn't immediately understand why he chose this place. The building hadn't been used for performances in years, its walls covered in dust and cobwebs. Yet there was something about it that drew us in. The labyrinth of hallways and closed-off rooms seemed to mirror our relationship, complicated, dangerous, and increasingly complex. We wandered slowly through the empty spaces, the whispers of the past lingering in the air, and in the stillness our footsteps echoed loudly. Julian held my hand, and although I felt his warmth, something inside me began to stir. This place felt like a trap. I couldn't shake the feeling that things were going too far, but I kept walking, not asking any questions. We found ourselves in a hall that seemed untouched since the last performance. The old curtains still hung on the stage, and in that moment, the silence between us became unbearable. "Do you feel how strange it is here?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. Julian only nodded, his face calm, but I could see a flicker of unease in his eyes. We were no longer just lovers escaping reality. Something darker and deeper had begun to unfold between us. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. On the way home, as I checked my phone, I came across a message from Thomas. It was short, but unsettling. "Don't forget about the budget meeting next week." It was odd. Thomas rarely spoke to me so directly about finances or business, but something in his tone made me pause. He had been more attentive to the details of our financial conversations lately. Why now? I glanced at the screen again. Julian looked at me, and for a moment I felt a strange discomfort, as if something between them was known without my knowledge. But I pushed the thought away. It was too crazy to be true. Julian always found new places for us to hide from reality, and this time he suggested something entirely unexpected: a private recording studio. The place seemed perfect. With its soundproof walls, soft lighting, and complete absence of people, no one could find us here. We were hidden from the world, as if everything happening between us existed only within these four walls. I entered the studio and immediately felt the air thicken with tension and sweetness. Julian was already waiting for me inside. His gaze was serious, but in his eyes burned the passion that instantly consumed me. This was the moment I had been chasing, the one that made me believe this dangerous game was worth playing. As I walked closer, he reached out his hand, and I felt the familiar warmth of his touch. That touch every time seemed to flood my mind, erasing all doubts and fears. We stood there not saying a word, but every gesture, every look spoke volumes. We both knew why we were here. Slowly, I took off my coat, feeling the tension between us rise with every passing second. Julian stepped closer, silently unbuttoning my shirt, his fingers gliding across my skin, sending sparks of pleasure through me. It was like electricity, surging through my entire body. In that moment, all my thoughts and doubts vanished. I was no longer a wife, a lover, or someone bound by responsibilities. I was just a woman, completely lost in the sensation that the world no longer existed beyond this room. His hands confidently moved over my body, and each kiss filled me with the feeling I had craved. In these moments when we were alone, everything else lost its meaning. I felt that it was for moments like this that I had been willing to risk everything. When his lips touched mine, I surrendered completely, knowing this was the moment I had started this affair for. Or at least that's what I told myself. We forgot about everything. With each of his movements, each touch, I lost track of time. We gave ourselves to passion with such intensity, as if it was our last chance to be together. His hands moved over my skin, igniting a fire that consumed me from within. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a game. This was something more, something I couldn't control. When it was over, I lay on the soft carpet of the studio, still feeling his touch on my skin. I realized that this feeling, this was what had kept me here, what made me continue despite all the risks. These moments, when reality faded, were what I had seemingly started this dangerous game for. But even then, lying next to him, I began to feel a slight unease. Why was I here? Why was I still continuing? And was it really for these moments that I was willing to risk everything I had? That evening was filled with glamour and intrigue. Thomas and I attended a luxurious masquerade ball at one of the city's most elegant hotels. I hoped to forget my worries, immersing myself in the atmosphere of fun and anonymity. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Thomas looked dashing in his tuxedo, and I chose a dark blue dress adorned with feathers on my mask. It created a sense of mystery and playfulness, but it also reminded me of what I was hiding from him. As we entered the hall, filled with music and light, I felt the tension building inside. Among the dancing couples, I spotted Julian. He looked stunning as always in an elegant suit and a mask that concealed his features. Despite being in the same hall as Thomas, I felt the pull toward Julian rekindle within me. There was something special about wearing a mask. The anonymity allowed us to draw closer, as if we could forget about reality. We exchanged glances, and each time our eyes met, I felt a fire ignite within me. Under the pretense that we needed a break from dancing, I led Julian to a dark corner of the hall where no one could see us. "It's so nice here," I whispered, gazing into his eyes. "It feels like a dream." He smiled, and at that moment, The whole world outside this place disappeared. We began to lean toward each other when suddenly I heard the sound of a click. Turning around, I noticed someone from our circle of acquaintances standing nearby with a camera in hand. They were so engrossed in our interaction that they didn't realize I recoiled in horror from Julian. My heart raced as I realized that this person could tell Thomas about us. I tried to remain calm, but the awareness that our interaction was in jeopardy made me feel vulnerable. Returning to Thomas, I worked to appear nonchalant. We continued to dance, but my mind was swirling with thoughts. I couldn't let this moment expose us destroy everything that had developed between Julian and me. Yet I also understood that the game I was playing was becoming increasingly risky. Meanwhile, the acquaintance approached Thomas and, unaware that they had just disrupted my composure, showed him the photograph. I felt the blood drain from my face as I saw Thomas glance at me and then at Julian. His face twisted with fury, and he quickly asked us to step outside for a talk. I felt everything inside me tighten with fear and shame. We stepped out onto the balcony where the sounds of the party faded into the background. "What's going on here?" he asked, barely restraining his anger. "I see you two together, and this isn't the first time." His words pierced me, and I felt my knees buckle. I couldn't come up with an excuse. For a moment, the thought crept in that everything I had dreamed of was collapsing right before my eyes. Julian stood beside me, tense, and I understood that this conversation would determine everything. This evening, which I had long awaited, had now become the beginning of the end. The confrontation I had feared finally happened. Julian and I stepped out onto the balcony, and the cold evening air couldn't cool Thomas's burning rage. I felt panic rising within me, but at the same time I knew it was time to tell the truth. All those days filled with fear and doubt had accumulated inside me, like a knot ready to burst. "I'll explain everything," I started softly, but Thomas cut me off. "Explain? What are you going to explain, Amelia? That you're cheating on me with my best friend?" His voice was filled with disdain and pain. I froze, unsure of how to respond. Julian stood beside me, silent, his face revealing no emotions, but I could sense his tension. I knew he might have expected me to defend our connection, but in that moment I couldn't. "Yes, I cheated," I blurted out. "I can't lie anymore. I couldn't handle it." Thomas inhaled sharply, and I noticed his eyes darken with anger. There was not a shred of pity in his gaze. "You've ruined everything," he said, glaring at me. "Not just me, but us. I'm severing all business ties with Julian. He will have nothing to do with our company anymore." My knees buckled as I heard that. I couldn't believe how quickly he made that decision. But his next words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You want to keep all this to yourself? Everything we've built together?" he sneered. "No, Amelia, it all stays with me, and if you disagree, I will destroy your career." Thomas's words pierced through me like a knife. I felt a cold wave wash over me as he made those threats. I knew he was capable of this. He had always been a calculating man, and I understood that these were not just empty threats. He spoke of my career, of the future I had built, and in an instant, everything could be ruined. "But that's not fair," I exclaimed, unable to hold back. "I can't just walk away like this." Thomas scoffed, but there was no humor in his eyes. It was rage, hiding a deep wound of betrayal. "Fair? Do you think this is fair?" he asked, stepping closer to me. "You deceived me, and now you will pay for it." I knew I was standing on the edge of a precipice. This was my last chance to change everything, and all I could do was watch as my life crumbled before my eyes. I couldn't let that happen. I had to choose: stay with Thomas and protect my career, or fight for my love for Julian, risking everything. But inside there was no certainty, and I felt fear seeping into every fiber of my being. In that moment I realized there was no turning back. I sat on the beach, watching the soft waves wash onto the sand, feeling as if my inner world was crumbling apart. The decision I had to make had been difficult, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost everything I once had. My life seemed to be in chaos, and every thought about what had transpired only deepened the pain. But amidst all this pain, I began to realize something important. In this moment of solitude and reflection, I felt a sense of liberation. I was not just a victim of circumstance. I could change my life, choose my path, no matter how challenging it might be. The sun began to rise slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. This new dawn symbolized the beginning of something else, something new. I understood that, for once in my life, I needed to make a choice not for others, but for myself. At that moment, I saw Julian's silhouette in the distance. My heart raced as he approached me, and I knew he had come to talk. His face was serious, but a glimmer of hope shone in his eyes. "Amelia," he started, and I felt myself freeze, waiting for his words. "I want us to start fresh. No secrets, no lies. Just you and me." I looked at him and realized that he was sincere, but at the same time I felt that despite all the love and connection we shared, this was not the path I should take. I had to choose myself. This new dawn was for me, a chance to start anew, but not with Julian, rather on my own. "I appreciate you, Julian," I said, trying to speak confidently, "but I can't continue this story. I need to figure myself out, who I am, and what I need." I saw his expression change, hope yielding to understanding. He nodded as if accepting my decision, but there was sadness in his eyes. "I'll always be here if you change your mind," he said quietly. I felt my heart tighten inside, but at the same time I was sure of the correctness of my choice. I needed to follow my own path, and while this decision was hard, I knew it would lead me to a new life. As Julian walked away, I remained alone on the beach, inhaling the fresh sea air and savoring the fact that this new day would be mine. I was ready to move forward, to become the person I had always wanted to be. The new dawn promised numerous possibilities, and I was determined to seize this chance.